Well, lovely. Thanks everybody for joining. And for those who are watching this recording, thank you for watching this recording. Today's masterclass, how to accelerate growth with personalization at scale. So generally what we're going to be discussing, it's a high level view of like why personalization matters and kind of spending more of the time getting into the nitty gritty, how you can think about personalization for your specific business, and then an overview of recommendations, best practices, frameworks for how to approach adding more personalization to your specific business. As a brief introduction, I am Lance. I'm a senior strategist here at Bell Curve. So we work with kind of post-Series A companies as they're growing to develop growth strategies and help them out with whatever's needed to achieve that next leg of growth. Personalization is obviously a big part of that at some level. So joining with me today is one of our closest partners, Rohit from mParticle. And they're a great partner when it comes to this. Something called the CDP. For some of you folks that aren't familiar, we're going to be covering what that actually means. And he's going to be sharing a lot of his knowledge from in the trenches, working with different brands and companies at different stages to implement some of these strategies and really kind of connect the dots between the data and the end result. So objectives for today are one, learning about why personalization matters and how it works. And then we're spending most of our time, like I said, on execution. So what is everything you might need in order to execute and launch a personalization strategy for your company? Broken up into 6 different sections, starting from high level, what is personalization, down to a recommended tech stack. This isn't prescriptive by any means. We're just talking about the ecosystem so that you can bespoke make it to your specific business case. But it has been a big topic that we've seen come around a lot of the classes that we teach at Demand Curve. And naturally, as consumer behavior changes, we thought it was a good time to start to talk about it more. And hopefully this will be the first of a few classes that we'll teach on personalization because there's so much to it. So think of this as the high level overview with tactics. And then later on, we can get more tactical and kind of make it more specific to more folks. So that being said, starting with the first section, what is personalization? Old school definitions. So it's the exercise of respectfully collecting relevant user data and then using that data to make experiences for that customer. Examples that we've all seen in the wild as consumers, both B2C and B2B, is the requisite email, insert first name, but also from apps and different products themselves, how it's evolved. First example here you'll see on the left is from Canva, Strava for any of the fitness folks out there. The app and the product itself is usually leveraging data to make a completely personalized overview of your goals, your progress, and how you compare against friends and colleagues. SMS is an upcoming channel that's really taken off over the past 3 years, and a lot of consumers expect that now, not just for transactional, hey, you're confirmed for installation tomorrow, but now actual product recommendations based off of other data points. This is arguably probably the most famous and really has been the case study for personalization over the past few years. It's Spotify's Wrapped. So since 2019, 3 billion streams and counting. It's led to 21% more downloads in the first week that it launched way back when. And kind of adjacent to that, it's led to, being one worldwide trending on the TikToks, the Twitters, and Facebooks of the world. This is where, personalization hits scale. So when we talk about personalization, it's more than just insert first name or making a recommendation based off of where somebody lives. It goes top funnel all the way down to bottom funnel. And we're going to start to chip away at kind of examples of all those different pieces. Product is probably arguably the place where I'm assuming most attendees here are curious about. I think a transactional email, if you're B2C and you use Klaviyo, or if you're B2B and you're using Outreach, it's pretty table stakes to know how to use personalization, insert first name, insert company name. But when it comes to product and product experience, the way personalization can really bring it up a level and meet consumers where they are currently is by making more contextual and relevant recommendations. As an example, if you're on an e-commerce site and you're browsing sweaters and you do it for 20 minutes and you log off. You later go back to the same website, and now instead of getting the same experience that you got the first time, it's a full list of recommendations based off of your previous search. That's kind of tier one personalization based off of just basic website behavior that you've already exhibited. If you step it up a little bit and you get into like the Nikes of the world, where their run club knows the size of your shoes, what kind of shoes you like, what kind of activities you prefer, there it's product evolved. So it's not just the web experience by giving you more personalized catalog recommendations, but it's actually cross-selling into different experiences across their mobile apps, across their emails, by providing not just, buy this recommendations. It's providing education, nurture, a lot of mid-funnel messaging that for the consumer in modern times, like it is table stakes and that's what they expect. And reflected in numbers, we're going to cover in a couple of slides, it's huge, the differentiator between companies that can execute on this properly and thoughtfully and those that choose not to. To understand some of the data points that we have to work with across personalization, there's different groups of data sets that you're able to collect. First party data means these are lists of people or groupings of users that have explicitly given information to your company, where they live, their shoe size, what they prefer, where they work, their title, etc. And that information and those data points are owned by your company entirely. Second and third party data, this is where the opportunity begins to arise, has been the kind of go-to up until the past few years ago. So second and third party data is collected through a variety of different means. So example, some of the data aggregators for sales tools on the B2B side. If you've browsed the site and they've asked you to download a free extension, you've given your work email, you've given your location, your title, your company name, they've then built that list out and they've brokered it or sold it off somewhere else. And that somewhere else list is available to marketers, salespeople, sales tools, anybody that might want to use it for something, and they're able to purchase it and leverage it. So as you saw through kind of a riskier kind of example, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, this is a poor use of third-party data. So these users had no idea their information was being used for not so good reasons. And as we've seen the big platforms, which we'll cover in depth a little bit later, Facebook and Apple changing a lot of their privacy regulations and some of their processes, second and third party data is the biggest grouping of data points at risk. So personalization as an end result, fantastic for improving your business and increasing your revenue, but it's also a risk mitigator. And it's something that we strongly encourage, I think, as many companies as possible to start building a first-party data strategy to mitigate future risk, not just to revenue and bottom line, but also to culture and PR, perception. By the numbers, so like how personalization starts to matter. We've seen a 10 to 15% lift in revenue from companies that leverage it. On the e-commerce side, for D2C companies, the ones that are pure play digital, it's even higher. So 25+% increase in revenue when they do implement some of these personalization strategies. From a consumer standpoint, something that's massive, if your company sells to any user who's a millennial or younger, 70+%, expect and prefer to stay with the company and shop with the brand who leverage and give personalized experiences. From a Netflix standpoint, this is another interesting stat, personalized recommendations on your account, they account for 75% of what actually ends up being watched. So personalization increases your bottom line, makes your consumers like your brand more, gives an opportunity for consumers to fall in love with your brand. The flip side of it is churn. So when personalization isn't done at all, or if it's done incorrectly, 54% of B2C shoppers are going to churn because of a bad customer experience. So as a culture, modern shoppers are very much looking for a brand that they want to fall in love with and a brand experience. But at the same time, they're very quick to leave if they have something and they encounter an experience that isn't entirely possible. So this culminates into the net. Companies that use personalization tactics will win more customers and grow faster than those who don't. This is why personalization matters. To get into some of the how this is getting done, I'm actually going to pass it on to Rohit to cover this, who's intimately familiar with the current data ecosystem and what the environment looks like for companies who are looking to implement some of these strategies. So Rohit, why don't you take it away?
Awesome. Thanks, Lance. Hey, everyone. So yeah, just a quick look at the brief timeline of digital privacy, or privacy as we know it, obviously because it is so tightly wound with personalization or any sort of contact with your customers. So as we know, I believe it was May 25th, right? In 2018, GDPR officially kind of was live, if you will. Within 2 years, we had CCPA, obviously here in California, and I believe there's 12 or over a dozen states that are planning to or already have put their own state-based privacy laws when it comes to this type of information. So there's no stopping it. I think it's an inevitable fact that, obviously, and rightfully so, to protect the consumer's privacy. So that was more from a governance perspective there. Then we started having the actual the channels, or the platforms, if you will, with iOS 14.5 with the ATT tracking status, which we'll get to. I think there was a question in there earlier too, so we can certainly answer that. So not only was it more from a law or governing body perspective, even the channels that the consumers are operating in are essentially getting more and more privacy centric as well. We also, I'm sure everyone's been looking at a lot of the more recent Apple iPhone ads, and they're just privacy, for example. It's not even about the phone anymore. So you're seeing kind of the effect there that you see. And then of course, we've been moving away from third-party cookies for quite some time. And then cookies in general, or those short-lived tracking components, are likely either going to evolve or change or even get removed over time. So the whole point, though, is first-party data is going to be your best friend here as we kind of evolve through this. Now, what happens in conjunction with this is just the complexity of data in general, right? A lot of things that when I'm speaking to customers, or when we're talking to other brands, we have to remind them that it's not a linear path anymore of interaction, right? It's not I go to a website, I buy something, and I'm done. It is I go to a website and I might buy it, I add it to cart, and I jump onto my phone and I continue the purchase or the journey, let's say, and then I may go finish it on a different computer and log back in. And that's just one example of something that all of us do. I'm sure all of us have done that before, but all of those interaction points, all of those data sources and those platforms are driving and contributing valuable data. But how do you make sure it's managed kind of, as expected? And if it's not managed as expected, we end up with this kind of data chaos situation where you see this kind of spaghetti, almost like a spaghetti code representation of all the data points of a user. Data gets siloed because of not only the fact that there are multiple channels that they're interacting in, you inevitably pick up different tools for different parts of this customer interaction, right? Whether it's a engagement tool, whether it's an analytics tool, whether it's your backend system and warehouse. But the thing is, the way that those tools evolve need some way to ensure that as they evolve, that core state of data doesn't get adversely affected. And one potential way to do that, when we jump over the next slide here, is going to be a CDP, which we'll get to more and more later in this presentation. But from the official definition, as you can read here, right, it's essentially a way to consolidate customer data and ensure that it's activated accurately and representing each individual user. So this is a very basic graphic. We'll see this again as we come back to the topic. But essentially, that spaghetti map that we saw earlier gets far nicer in this situation, where data gets consolidated in one place, profiles of users get accurately resolved, and then that way, once you get to that component of activation, there's no second guessing of the quality of that data and the accuracy of who that data belongs to or who that data represents. Rather than having it just kind of, okay, we have to silo the mobile and this warehouse together and a different integration set. Basically, you get this kind of nice, neat little centralized architecture here. And then, of course, this is I think this is a pretty powerful statement. Maybe some of us see it. Some folks might be, of course, yeah, everyone wants this, but as we saw from that privacy timeline, it's not even just an opinion anymore. It's going to have to kind of work that way, where it's if you got to be prepared for the world where there is no third-party dependency on data or tracking, let's say, and you need that infrastructure, something like a CDP, to ensure that as those things change over time, you're ready to adapt. And among other things about what a CDP can do, adaptability is one of the biggest components that we see, in terms of an immediate value add there. And of course, if you kind of don't expect that, you end up at a higher risk. So that's it from that. And Lance, please hop in.
Yeah, we already have a couple of really good questions in here. To really speak to it, it's like CDP, like what that actually means. Great. But where we've seen this not work well is really in the data process. So to kind of talk through, and I think Rohit, you can probably speak to this better, how we go about collecting that quality data and why it matters to do it in a streamlined, uniform way. Yeah, I would say take it away.
Absolutely. So there's kind of three big rules here. And if we take a step back, not as, let's say, professionals in the data world or people, serving these experiences to customers, just take it as us as consumers, as, me as a user of Spotify or Pinterest or any of these tools or any of these apps, let's say, right? Collecting data responsibly, making sure it's a customer-centric approach to how you interact with them, and then obviously not overstepping. If we take a step back, obviously all of us as consumers want that. So we're going to go through some examples of specifically looking at Pinterest on how they've kind of adapted these in a second. But this is a great quote as well. CEO of a test there, and I believe it's like a surveying or tool. And I apologize if I butchered the description there. But they do a lot of kind of user feedback, among other things. And essentially, what he's saying is you need to be prepared again to the end of the third-party cookie. We all know kind of what that currently unlocks for certain companies, but as privacy gets more and more strict, the efficacy of that drops. So we need to get to that level of first-party data faster, and then that way, again, once these changes happen, it won't really affect folks. I personally work with a lot of customers that always were wondering, hey, what happens there? But if we have this first party approach already, do we have to worry about that? And kind of the easy answer is no. Obviously, there's things to adjust to, but this is extremely applicable to almost any brand that has intentions of using customer data to the customer's benefit. So let's take a look at some of the examples of those kind of three rules here. So collecting data responsibly. This is an example from Pinterest's agreement. Essentially, the biggest point here is to make it very easy for the reader. I think users are getting more and more interested in reading it now. I think up until now, people were just kind of scrolling past and hitting accept. And I'm sure a lot of people still do that. But in the case of somebody does read this, you want to make sure it's not some legal jargon or something that doesn't make any sense to the end user. It should be clear and straightforward information for the user before they accept and they use your tools. You may be, again, a lot of us who've been, if you've downloaded newer apps in the last year and a half, or you've seen the updates, the new thing that we see with iOS 14.5 is the ask apps not to track or allow in terms of the ATT status, which is bringing in an IDFA or collecting it automatically. A big component of that is that description. It's very similar to descriptions we've seen when they ask for location permission, right, or push notifications. But one thing you'll notice, and I've seen this as a theme, is that they all have the same thing. Say, hey, we want to make your experience better, and this is going to help us do that. It's pretty much nothing beyond that, which makes sense, and it is true, right? But you want to make sure that whatever you put in those text blobs or how Pinterest did it here, no matter who's reading it, they'll understand exactly what's going on. So that's the first component of collecting responsibly. The second is making sure that you're actually getting this customer-centric mindset. It's not just a giant targeting play, and you say, let's get people that bought shoes and then show them a bunch of shoes. That's, I would say, targeting. But personalization gets more to the one-to-one, and it's contextual. So Pinterest, for example, picked up or acquired this company called Yes, or acquired the Yes to basically do personalized shopping recommendations based on previous history. And it's very straightforward, right? You've bought something, it's pretty clear that is influencing the recommendations moving forward, but it's specific to you as that end user, not, again, everybody who has potentially shopped in that category. And then lastly, in terms of don't overstep, this is kind of the opposite example. where and Lance mentioned earlier, right? Bad customer experiences, either because it's not used in terms of a personalization approach or they've done it poorly, ends up in a situation like this, where either they targeted the wrong person in an attempt for a one-to-one type personalization effort, but the information about that person was not accurate at all, clearly, as we can see here. So this is kind of one of the last things anybody wants to deal with, because there's some breakage in the foundation of that data that led to this message being sent out. So those are kind of the three main rules here. I'll kick it back over to Lance to talk more about the general strategy of personalization as well.
Yeah, because there's a lot to it. And the real time, so the data cleanliness and having a data strategy starts step one. Step two, implementing a personalization strategy starts with understanding the why. Why are you doing this? We're going to cover kind of these 6 core places to start with as an internal discussion at your companies, or if you're already along the journey of implementing some level of personalization. These are the best practices that we've seen implemented across the best companies that execute on this the best. And a lot of it really starts again with the customer-centric approach, because there's lots of levels to this. You can do and use first-party data to be more effective at targeting somebody with a white paper, or targeting somebody with a bestseller list for an e-commerce store. But that's not the same. That's not quite the same experience as when you're personalizing a full product for them. So really kind of taking time to distinguish what are my KPIs and why as a company does this matter is critical before you even embark on a journey of implementing personalization level 1 or expanding some levels of personalization going forward. One way to think about this is a top-down approach. So what this means is at the top of the funnel, you're using light personalization where they're based, maybe what their name is, on specific channels, i.e. email, the first time they've been to the site, maybe your first communication out to those customers, without being too specific. Towards the bottom of the funnel, once you've qualified them and they've shown and exhibited behaviors that they're more likely to buy, or that they're just a higher value customer or lead on the B2B side, you can use and you have permission to use more levels of personalization. Think of user behavior as those users raising their hand, giving permission for your company to communicate more and more specific, more relevant data for them. So it's critical to understand where you're using personalization, what level of personalization you're using at that level, and which channels you're using to deploy it on. As a kind of basic example of how this plays out in B2C, channel 1, the most commonly used one, is email communications. So if you're asking for someone's email on their first visit to your website, join a newsletter, get 10% off, great, pretty table stakes. You have permission and they've given you, a company, that information to be able to communicate with them via email. It isn't quite at the level where they're giving you explicit permission to give them full-blown playlist recommendations. So you need to be able to keep that in mind. Channel 2, SMS, is being tied to email more and more so now. So with apps like Attentive coming on the scene and other kind of similar products and platforms, during the same conversion event as you're capturing somebody's email information, you're also asking for a cell phone number to communicate via SMS. Now, SMS is a very intimate channel versus email. Everybody's Gmail and Outlook inboxes are full of promotions and updates in those folders. SMS, contextually, you should understand, users are in a different mindset altogether. They're catching up with friends, they're communicating plans to a partner, they're talking about the kids. Like, it's all part of life level intimacy. It's not a place where you go and kind of search around or kill time like you do a promotions folder in Gmail. So the communications that you do send out, you need to keep that in mind. Channel 3, arguably a little bit more difficult to do well, is a website experience. So easier version of this is a landing page experience from ads. A more bespoke and kind of heavier lift is a website experience for a user based on, depending on where they're coming from or what their previous behavior is. And then last channel that we'll kind of walk through are ads. So very easy to deploy, very costly, and requires a bigger investment to do well. So there's trade-offs to all of these channels, but kind of how they work symbiotically. Email is where you can personalize communications to a customer for, hi, you've given me information. Here's what we are as a brand. Here's some cool offers, keep us in mind for ... SMS, based off of your very recent real-time behavior, you visited the site 5 times in the past hour and you saw these different catalogs, these 5 different products. Here's something you might be interested in, or an upsell potential. We noticed you left something in the cart. Here's 10% off to check out. Website for B2B. If an account or a certain company has sent 5 visitors to your website in the past 3 days and they check the box of they fall in our key accounts category, how can you change the whole website experience to really speak to that account specifically? And then lastly, ads. So ads used tactically when needed, built around events, built around key users or customers, like key accounts, or when you have a big high promo season for a B2C kind of e-commerce storefront. To speak a little bit, just to not leave B2B out, the way the top down looks for on the B2B side, localized customization at the very top. So just based off where the user is located, can you customize some or all of your product or communications to that location? Level 2, mid-funnel, after users have exhibited X behaviors, can you use and leverage personalization in order to send more relevant content? White papers, recommendations, best practices, things that would nurture an account to want to convert with you. And then bottom funnel value. So this is leveraging data points like title, location, company, number of users, number of employees, revenue amounts, recent news or press releases. All of those data points in order to really be specific and as contextual as possible in order to get those users converted. Actually, Rohit, why don't you talk through this one? This is an example of kind of how an ecosystem would work in real time and how all of these different channels in a perfect world work together to give accurate real-time segmentation abilities and personalization.
Yeah, definitely. And I already saw some questions on, and there's one that stood out to me about how to, properly manage multiple campaigns, different engagement tools, and this will speak to this. We can get to obviously more detail on that later. But this is a very kind of, if you remember that first little illustration of CDP, this is kind of, if you zoom in kind of half a click or maybe a half a click in, essentially what we wanted to do, right? Essentially what you want to do is make sure that as that data is getting collected from those top layers, right? Whatever the interaction points may be, right? It could be directly with, your app or website that the user's interacting on, but there's data coming in from back-end systems that, either are crunching data based on what those interactions are, and could be things like propensity scoring or, preferred channel, next best action, that kind of thing. Or it could also be coming from other tools. So, imagine in the world where if I'm on my mobile device and I click something, that is tracked as an event. But if that event triggered off an email in your engagement tool, the fact that that email was sent to the user and the user opened the email is also valuable information in the context of that user. So it spans, first of all, these different, points of collection in the first place. Once it gets, basically into something like, a CDP in this case, we're going to resolve that profile. So we ensure that regardless of if the backend system had, your internal customer ID, but then the mobile and web had a combination of that plus the device ID, and the input feed only had an email, we should be able to get back to the right user in a deterministic fashion. And that's going to be important moving forward too, as we dig deeper into this. But the point though is the data flow in and out is going to be real time, and it has to be, because all of this personalization stuff we're talking about has to be contextual, as Lance mentioned. And context obviously is very dependent upon time in terms of what a user has seen, what their experience is at that moment in time. And essentially making sure that these tools can get the data as necessary in the format that they expect in real time will help basically, kind of set the foundation of this, of this architecture here. And what I end up talking through a lot is gaining true interoperability between these tools. So if you're using 2 different engagement platforms and there's a campaign that needs some sort of suppression signal, it should be able to get that, even if it's not directly talking to the other tool. So through a CDP, not only are we integrating data points, we're actually making tools interoperable with each other because of the real-timeness and the quality of integrations between them. And again, we'll get into more specifics on this later.
Yeah, and it's kind of the critical bit too, like going back to the why, would your company want to do this? What does it, like, why does it matter to your customer? This is where internal product teams, as we've kind of like, as we've consulted as bell curve and kind of helped companies kind of go through this exercise, product teams are always thinking about product design, also product evolution, product roadmaps. They want to make the product better. And then marketing works in a different silo. How do we acquire customers? Bringing those two sides together, you have marketing who's traditionally been focused on data collection, where they come from, their first name, their email, their age, whatever it might be. And then on the other side, you've had product really focusing in on, leveraging the qubits of the world and mixed panel and amplitudes to see, okay, great, this segment of users has opened the app this many times, or here's our monthly active user base, or 85% of the users exit the app at this stage. This is now kind of bringing them together and leveraging the best of both silos and kind of making them work cross-functionally to make the end result, the customer experience, the full customer experience, more contextual and more positive for the end user. So as a recap, starting with the basics, like what are your goals? What and why does the company want to implement personalization? Is it to get more feedback? Is it to get more revenue? Is it to improve and limit attrition? Is it to acquire more customers? Critical. Step one. Moving into step two, it's the knowing. So like, what are your current existing data capabilities? Like, what is your current data strategy? Do you have one? Is there a way to expand the current data stack in order to be able to bring in all these additional data points and feed them back to marketing platforms or the product itself? Number three, taking a top-down approach. So laying out in a framework, at the top level, what levels of communication and personalization do we feel is accurate and genuine for a user at this stage, all the way down to the bottom funnel. How much is too much without being creepy? Are we overdoing it? Kind of like the Pinterest example, or is this valuable? Are we actually driving value by being more personalized? Number four, on the B2C, like the typical channel, how this ends up being executed across the different channels is laying boundaries and parameters for each one. What are the guardrails? What can we use SMS for? What can we not use SMS for? What can we use email for? What should we not use email for? When should we deploy personalized ads and when should we not? And then the last one, finally, for B2B, it's, again, how much information, how much personalization can we leverage without being too over the top and actually hurting the chances of closing the sale, winning the account, whatever it might be. It's a bit of a laborious task and exercise, but we've seen time and time again, like it is critical that this gets put on paper and discussed internally for alignment, because again, like, if there's anything we've picked up for any size team, whether it's a startup or a huge company, you're trying to align a product team with the marketing team, with leadership, and sometimes sales teams. So the only way to be able to do this is to bring it all together and kind of making sure that these are the guardrails. This is the full-blown strategy that all of us are aligned with, because it'll just make everything more effective, i.e. the tactics that we're now going to cover. We're going to cover the same kind of basic ones that we've reviewed before, but in more depth. So where and how you can use personalization via email. So most basic sense, we know it's your birthday, happy birthday. We know what your first name is. Here's an email with your first name. Content otherwise is the same that gets sent out to everybody else. One step above that, it's segmenting the emails. So the example that we shared before, if you're browsing sweaters a week before and you come back to a website and now you have a brand new feed based off of brand affinity, based off of who you searched, based off of what's available, can have huge impacts on revenue. It's something like 760% more email revenue is won by companies, B2C companies, that leverage user behavior for segmenting their audiences. So if you can just pick it up on the most basic sense, the signal of what users are doing on your site or your app, and standing up segmentation, and then using that segmentation and that kind of behavior to give a user a bespoke or different experience than everybody else. Triple digit percentage in opportunity there to increase revenue from email as a channel, just email. And as we kind of move on to, there we go. The next one, it's how do we think about kind of collecting this information? So product now has evolved a lot from what it was 5, 6, even 3 years ago. Historical playbook is you land on a website, leave your email for 10% off, leave your email for a newsletter, something basic like that. What a lot of companies have missed out on, but are starting to implement more, is onboarding, and making the onboarding flow as a way to collect more personalized data to build up their first party data list, but also to make the customer experience more positive. And overwhelmingly, we're seeing that customers now are very much willing to give non-private information out in order to make their future experiences more positive with the brand. This is being taken up mostly by B2B, but we're also seeing this now finally kind of crossing over to the B2C side. So think about it as a company, it's best practice and highly recommended now to be in this bucket of first movers that start at the checkout process in terms of collecting a better profile of that shopper. Because in the future, how this can be deployed, it's endless different ways. So email, it's been one of the oldest channels ever running, but it's version 3 now that we're on. The net and the recommendation here is to think about how can we leverage and segment our users? Step 1, are you doing it now? Could it be more effective? Can it be more real time? Can we clean our list faster, more often? And then from the checkout perspective, post checkout, is there a point in which we can collect a better profile or more information on a specific user or customer without inhibiting or adding friction to the checkout process, but also communicating that this is going to be a better experience in the future for you if we have a better sense of who you are as a shopper. Second channel here is SMS. So very obviously, like, we've more than used to like all the transactional SMSs that we all get. DoorDash is on its way, Uber Eats is on its way, your Uber's arriving in 5 minutes, Amazon shoppers, started their order for you. This is very much table stakes if you're in the B2C world. On the B2B side, confirming an appointment, confirming a demo, we have your information, thank you, somebody will be reaching out. On the transactional side, that continues very much as is. It is table stakes, and companies that haven't deployed it or launched those lines of communication with customers now, highly encouraged to do so, even if it's just at a transactional level. Where SMS is moving towards, though, is leveraging all that behavioral insight happening within an app or a website or somewhere else to give more real time and more relevant notifications and alerts. So what we've started to see more, based off how many times you've visited or based off of recent checkout, I think all of us have seen, credit card offers or recent travel deals. Don't forget to leave a review for us. Kind of step 2, like, we're kind of getting to a higher tier of personalization. We're sending you this request because you've exhibited that the shopper just dropped off their order or that you just referred somebody. Thank you so much. But expanding beyond that, how much more can we push and leverage data to make communications even more tailored and bespoke? So example, if somebody has been onto your app and they've browsed certain things, they've left something in the cart and haven't checked out, it's the difference of previous notification would be like, you left something in your cart. Now instead, can we leverage that to give that user better recommendations or different recommendations and assume, is there a way to know without assuming that they didn't check out because they weren't completely happy? That's a bit of a challenge to the product teams, but to the marketing teams, if it's executed correctly and segmented correctly, that's where we're kind of seeing the real outliers shine bright. Really leveraging deep user behavior and deep kind of real-time data points to be able to give better recommendations and more relevant communications. To cover website, so this one can really be a 3-hour webinar. I'll lightly kind of touch on it, where can you customize, and is there value in customizing a web experience based off of someone's data? Most basically based off of where they're based. So something that doesn't require a first party data grab or request, as we kind of see here with Blue Apron. So for the Northeast, is it a matter of showing a different hero image that's more Northeastern? A lobster roll in the summertime versus in the South where it might be barbecue, to make that experience more relevant and more contextual to where they are. And from a shopping feed perspective, leveraging personalization so that when a user returns, you're giving them not necessarily what you think they might like, kind of like what Nike Run Club does very well, but also as a way to clear through inventory. So again, like winning revenue by using their previous behavior and shopping behavior, average order cards, what they've purchased, in order to kind of clear through catalog that you need to move, product that you need to move faster. It opens up cross-sell abilities. It's the ideal time to ask and show recommendations based off of different things without necessarily saying, hey, Rohit, we think you would love this shoe. So all ladders back up to, being able to segment cleanly the data that you have and then starting to deploy it, and kind of segue into that. It would be ads. Ads, it's the biggest trade-off with personalizing your ads is going to be bandwidth and investment. So bandwidth by your marketing team and your media buyers, they have to actually go in and stand up a lot of these ads and campaigns. That it's not necessarily a heavy lift, but it requires some very strict diligence in order to be able to test and pick up signal on what's working best. But then also investment in terms of creative. So light personalization abilities, leverage the copy. It's a couple clicks. Heavier personalization would be actually taking a photo like this example here. So ads, I would defer. This is a much bigger conversation to be had, highly effective in terms of increasing and improving performance, but should be very selectively chosen and used as needed. Kind of another example, just a wider variety of how you can leverage it. If a company just wants to teeter into personalizing your ads, one and a common place to start is on a remarketing basis. So this is, again, not leveraging necessarily first party data. So like not first name, last name, where they live. This is based off of a first party data set that you've accumulated by collecting their pixel information when they've been to your site, and you've stored it in a CDP or a data warehouse, and you're leveraging that to give them a different experience. Starting with remarketing as a bucket, measure the success and the signal coming from that, and then expanding out later on. But yeah, I hate to be so brief on this one. With ads and website, they can definitely take on a different webinar just unto themselves. But for the sake of time, we will move into kind of what other channels we can leverage this in, bringing into the product side. How can customer support be more relevant and helpful to the end user? So we have a lot of information, and as a company collects first party data on a specific profile, how can we make customer support more useful for them? How many times have you been to a site and you've submitted a ticket after you've logged into the website and they already have all your previous information, but you have to restate it again in a chat for the first, like as if it's the first time of them meeting you? If those companies had an ability to connect all those data points together, why can't they just go, hey, Rohit, great to see you again. I know you're based in Texas. I know this is your account. I know this is your previous buying behavior. Are you asking about this order number, which you placed last week, or is it something else? Modern platforms like Zendesk and all the customer support platforms that we can leverage right now, they have all of those abilities, and they're really being underutilized just because they lack that signal, and that they lack that capability of being able to connect from what we know to what the customer is looking for. From a product personalization standpoint, abilities are endless. This is Grammarly. This follows the lines of Spotify based off of user behavior. How can we use it as an engagement gamification tactic? Also just make a user feel good about what they're doing, or challenge them if it's necessary, like a Strava. All shown to increase net promoter scores, user engagement, reduce attrition, and increase revenues. So I want to leave some time for the data stack. So with this, I'll pass it back to Rohit to kind of talk through, because I see Daz, you just asked a question. We've had a couple so far that are really great that I want to tackle through. Rohit, Rohit, why don't you walk through kind of the tech stack and how we can go ahead and implement some of these strategies?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, we said the title slide. Let's kind of move forward then. So this is how we can actually do it. Next slide is going to basically have this kind of foundation. Again, I mentioned this before. CDP is a great foundation to ensure that if you do intend to have a growing tech stack, which is almost every company in existence now, this is a great place to start that journey. And again, there's some great questions that we'll get to in the Q&A. So what does that actually look like? I'm going to bring back that graphic. So basically what you're seeing here is like just a dashboard of what we have in mParticle, for example. What that's actually doing is this. We're all familiar. I've shown this slide twice already, right? We're making sure that as data gets collected, it gets resolved. As it gets resolved, it can get activated upon either within the platform because of the fact that it's a deterministic approach to resolving identities, being able to do cross-channel audience building or build calculations based on the actions that they've done, right? Average purchase price, regardless of channel, for example. All of that is based on the fact that that profile has been consolidated and resolved regardless of where that user has interacted. And then, of course, once you have that, you have who they are, and of course, you have what they did. You now have a very easy way to push that information out, of course, in real time to any of these different channels that Lance has been going over to ensure that there is a very high level of context when it comes to personalizing the messaging for that user. So these are kind of the four things that you want to look for in a and really any time you want to look at a solution that will help build this foundation. So first and foremost is this privacy forward approach. We talked about this at length earlier, right? That the world is evolving when it comes to privacy, and an example is you'd want a system that doesn't just simply keep opt-in flags as user attributes. Let's say you might want to look for something that has a proper framework dedicated to consent management and compliance, being able to respond to a data subject request if somebody wants their data deleted, for example, even being able to send that message out downstream, right? That's more than just having a flag on a profile, if that makes sense, and I can help answer more questions later. Number two is, of course, you have that privacy component, but it only makes sense if it's tied to the right users. So having a strong identity foundation is going to be very, very important, and ensuring that not only that, of course, we have the right users. Again, you could be on a mobile app, you could be on web. We want to make sure that the user is still seeing, like Lance is still Lance, right? It doesn't matter if he's on his phone or on the website. And then that's who they are. And then, of course, what they did. There should be a very good emphasis on data quality, because garbage in is going to be garbage out no matter what you have in your stack. And ensuring that what Lance did is captured accurately is going to be just as important as knowing who he is. So I always say this too when I'm talking to customers. It's one thing to know who they are, but if you don't know what they did, that's useless. And if you flip it, you know what they did, but you don't know who they actually are, that's also useless. You need both of those things together, very tightly wound. Next up is obviously the activation component that we talked about, making sure that the rest of the tools in your stack, right, that were endpoints of that data chaos spaghetti picture that we saw, now are receiving this data, of course, in real time, but it's not just simply dumping a file to an endpoint that they have, right? You want something that has a real-time API-driven approach. Obviously, we know that some tools in the stack, maybe they're not API first, and that's fine. And there are some edge cases there, but most modern tools now have some way of getting real-time data into the system. They'll have some semblance of their own data model. And the goal here is the depth and breadth of the integrations allow the CDP to make that translation for you without any hassle, right? It should be a point and click, and then your data is in whatever tool without much second guessing. Hey, is the data accurately represented in that context of that tool? And then, as I mentioned multiple times, make sure it's real time. Because again, as we talk about personalization and contextual personalization, of course, it doesn't matter if you're 3 days late to what that user was expecting, that's not going to be effective at all. The next part about this is insights from audiences. So making sure that after you have this great, accurate and robust first party data asset, you can actually build upon it. Right. So it's obviously one thing to send the data out, let's say the raw data events out to your engagement tools. And of course, a lot of these tools have things like journey building and segmentations and calculations as well. but making sure that, regardless of where those derivations are made, it's running off of the same data set. And for example, things like journeys is seen differently in the world of maybe, let's say, traditional CDP compared to a multi-channel engagement tool, right? So understanding the context of what you're trying to do is also important, right? But the whole point, though, is knowing this is all the who the user is component, right? If you accurately capture what they did across all these channels, you should be able to segment regardless of where the data came from. You should be able to unlock very valuable and responsive customer journeys based on what they've done and build calculations. And then the last thing I wanted to call out is, as you build out the stack, right? These are kind of the three big areas we see. There's plenty more, by the way, but when you start to look at tools that'll help either make decisions based on what your customers have done, or engage back with them based on what they've done, of course, or how we're gonna reach out to them for outreach or upsells or whatever it might be. Analytics, engagement, customer support are all going to be recipients of this data, but you notice that there are very different types of tools running off of the same data set. And sometimes a lot of folks will step by step get these tools, implement them individually, and realize that there's been a lot of duplicative work to power up these tools. So as you start to think about that stack getting built out, you can look at some of these categories and look at that as maybe one of the indicators of, hey, I might need a CDP now because I am looking at analytics and engagement, at least at first. How do I make sure that my engineering team is not sending the same data point twice, which can of course lead to data quality issues and misalignment of data. And then we're adding customer support after that, for example. So we want to make sure that you keep kind of a future thinking approach, because I think one thing that I keep reminding a lot of folks is, it's one thing to buy a tool to solve today's problems, but problems evolve over time. Challenges evolve over time. So you want something, again, that's adaptable, knowing that not only will your data change over time, but your stack will change over time to react to the growth of your company and all your initiatives. So that's the last thing I'll leave you with here. We definitely want to get to the Q&A, and we have only a few minutes officially, but
yeah, we do. I'll keep this slide open in case we don't cover anything, because we only have a few minutes left to cover Q&A. Feel free to reach out to us. Love trading notes, whether it's Rohit or myself. Yeah, happy to help in any way. There's some really good questions so far. Starting with, in no particular order, Rose, do we have an example workbook on how to create a data strategy? Yes, we have many. Over at Demand Curve, it is a heavy thing and it's very bespoke. We will send, or actually, if you just check Demand Curve, our main website, you will see under the resources some initial starting points. I would caveat though, there isn't a framework that works for everybody, so just keep that in mind. Ella, great question. What are your thoughts on SMS for B2B? Very effective. A B2B customer is a B2C customer. People are people. The differences, though, are the communication strategy. How much is too much? Calendly is kind of the case study here. People are okay receiving SMS once they've given permission for confirmations, reminders, ability to reschedule easily, ability to cancel really easily instead of having to search through an inbox. All positive B2B experiences where SMS works. From an acquisition perspective, this is where it depends on the context. So again, going back to the top-down approach, if you're using SMS on a first touch and you're saying, hey, I know your complete data stack. I think there was another question from somebody else. Maybe it was you, Vinesh. No, somebody else. Steven. We have it from a B2B side. So using SMS on a first touch and calling out what their data stack is because you found it was built with or whatever, they use Monday and ClickUp and whatever it might be, not likely going to be very positive experience for the customer. So again, it's about really setting up that framework and those parameters for your marketing or your communications team or your product team to use correctly. There's a balance between mechanics of a personalization strategy and then also communication style and content strategy behind it. What are we allowed to say and what should we say for the customer first at specific stages of the cycle? If it's on a third touch and they're very familiar and there's an open opportunity in Salesforce and it's a qualified account and it fits the bill, then I think definitely SMS, you have permission to ask a question about their data stack. Or if you have an upcoming webinar in an hour or a white paper that just got released hey, Joe, thought this would be right up your alley since you guys are a Salesforce/Marketo shop. SMS is good for those short blurbs. Anything lengthier, email is going to be a little bit better of a channel. In some of the previous questions, I do have there was one question about when you target a market, crypto, that's very niche, high net worth affected by the cycles. Basically, is there ever a reason to not use personalization when your market's been affected and your TAM has been affected too much? This isn't so much a mechanical answer or challenge. This is a communication marketing challenge. Put your mindset in the mindset of the customer, the big why. Are you using personalization? Personalization isn't going to fix the crypto market. Personalization is also not going to convince a smart investor to start investing when the market isn't right. But you can use personalization in order to continue communications and nurture those users so that they have a better perception of your product or company, so that in the future, or if you want to upsell them a different item, you've now leveraged personalization in a genuine, thoughtful way to help and not hurt. And then I think this is going to be on the minds of a lot. So we'll go a few minutes over, but Rohit, do you want to tackle this question? And the question is Apple's app tracking transparency policy. So basically users that are registered with an Apple ID. What's the impact on personalization?
Yeah, happy to answer that. And again, anything going over, our contact, we're happy to continue the conversation. I know there was some more questions that definitely I wanted to address, but we won't have time. But for this one, so again, I hinted at this earlier. And if we think about the goal of customers to get more to that first party asset, and I know that obviously a device ID is considered first party, it's from the user. What we're really talking about is known identifiers, not device-based, let's say. So really, a lot of our customers, for example, didn't have that much of, obviously there was a hit in everywhere in the industry, right? Everyone was kind of freaking out a little bit, especially when it came to things like attributing ads across social networks and stuff like that. But for us, let's say from a first party collection asset, assuming that your funnel to log in, let's say, or get a known piece of data was as upstream as possible, you were never relying on a device ID in the first place. Right. And I think that's why it affects people differently, right? If your app or your product or your service really doesn't have a component of login, obviously the impact is going to be greater. I think there were some stats at first that I think it was like 25% were expected to actually allow tracking just from the way it was phrased. So people were expecting to have a pretty decent drop in that data. And I think the last thing though is I wouldn't really want to personalize just on device, because there's a chance you have a shared device situation. There's a chance that there's context switching. There's a chance that it might not be that exact user at that moment in time. So it might be kind of what Lance was mentioning, that top to the bottom of the funnel, you're almost prematurely personalizing until you get lower in that experience when you really know who they are and they're expecting a more personalized experience, right? This is kind of what people were reacting to. I don't know, I forgot exactly how long ago, but there used to be, all the typical pop-up ads, maybe in like the mid to late 2000s, I guess, where they would get information from third-party cookies and it was like, how do you know my name type deal? And that was purely device-based, right? So you can kind of see how in the personalization context, people do expect when that's supposed to happen. It shouldn't show up the moment they open the app for the first time. So I think that's a great way to look at it is, do you really want to be personalizing at that device level in the first place? And then if so, obviously, depending on your industry and your app and your service, it might affect folks differently. And there might be a different way to address that component there.
That's right. I'll close it off with this because it kind of rounds out a few questions and a few asks that are around this, like when is personalization, when has it crossed the line? Is there, a built out kind of level or something that we can look at? Answer is unfortunately no, because it's going to be different for every kind of customer. And the exercise, we've done it dozens of times. It's so different for every type of consumer experience. Even if you take two different t-shirt companies, one might be more lifestyle, one might be more utilitarian. Those are going to have different kind of frameworks and parameters for when you're allowed to personalize and what. That's why going back to really understanding why you're looking to implement the strategy or some more personalization, it's about bringing an internal company together and moving everybody in the same direction so that product speaks with marketing, speaks with leadership, so that we know from a top-down approach, what are the core times when we have the ability to communicate with the customer, and during this specific time, what data do we have available to us? Now that we know what kind of data we have available to us, what channels can we communicate to them with? And then what are we allowed to say per channel for that specific stage? Building out that framework at different levels, top, mid, bottom, pre-purchase, purchase, post-purchase, new user, registered demo, demo not booked, not open, pipeline opportunity, open pipeline opportunity. Really going through that exercise of breaking it down for your particular business and company makes all the difference, because then instead of having to rely on a tactic to kind of carry and make personalization happen, you're reverse engineering from the why. And that's where it becomes, it pays off, and we start to see some of these, 25% increases in revenue, increases in demos booked, accounts won, sales velocity changes. It's 100% recommended. And the best practice really is that exercise of going through. That being said, unfortunately, we're out of time today to go over more of these great questions. Here's our contact information. Both Rohit and I were always available to trade notes. And in terms of more resources, Demand Curve, we have a full database of resources that have already been published and are there. Our newsletter always has growth tactics weekly. And over at Bell Curve, post Series A companies that want to kind of speak more specifically about possible use cases, we're also very happy to trade notes there. Rohit, anything to add before we wrap up?
No, I think all the questions have been great. We should be able to capture these too. And again, any of those folks that we weren't able to get to your questions, you have our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to either answer them directly there, or get you in contact with folks that are best suited for that. But really appreciate the interaction today, the participation here. It's been phenomenal. So really appreciate all everyone's time here.
Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of Thursday and the weekend ahead on this short week. Look forward to the next one. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care, everyone.